My name is Donna Iroldi. I am the senior editor at Business Travel News for lodging and meetings, and I'm very happy to join you today live. My last international business travel trip was to the Business Travel Show back in February 2020, so it's nice to be back, and thank you all for being here. During this question, we are going to have a few polling, or during the session, we're going to have a few polling questions operated by SwapCard, which is the technology that is operating the Business Travel Show Europe app. So if you have that available and downloaded and open with this session added to it, you can participate in the polling, and as well as then take the survey once the session is completed. I'd like to start with our panelists, introduce them. They're going to give themselves a brief introduction. We're going to start with Mark.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Newman. I'm responsible for travel for Novo Nordisk in North America, and also part of the global team, strategy for travel and meetings and travel operations.
Great, thank you. And Richard?
Yeah, good morning. Richard Eads. I'm the global category lead for travel, meetings and events in BP. I'm based in Sunbury, but obviously covering globally, so a lot of interaction with stakeholders across all the world. Thanks.
And then joining us virtually, we have Scott.
Yes, hi, folks. Thanks. Great to be here. Scott Gillespie, travel industry advisor at T. Clara, and delighted to be speaking on this topic today. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. And I'd like to kick things off with a couple of poll questions to get a sense of where our audience is on this topic. The first question is, do you currently manage your company's non-travel virtual interactions? And we'll give that a minute for people to populate. And let's see. I'm not seeing the results just yet. We do. Oh, are you in the panel? Have you added it to your agenda? And then there should be chat, questions, and polls available. And then...
We found it, Roger.
Okay. And do we have the results? I'm getting the votes in, and I'm not seeing the results, unfortunately. Do you know where the results are supposed to show up?
Can any of you see on your phones the results? Or do you want to... 20 votes. Have you got the results? Yeah. Let's just get the mic over. We're learning the joys of hybrid technology. Very relevant to this session.
Yeah, 21 votes, it's 95% no and 5% yes.
Great, thank you very much. And then the next question is, do you believe travel managers should take responsibility for non-travel interactions? Again, a simple yes or no. Okay, have a few. Okay, now the results from the first poll are starting to come in. give that another second.
Yeah, so the results of the second poll is 60% say no, 35% say yes. The question was, do you believe travel managers should take responsibility for non-travel interactions? 32% yes, 64% no, and 5% is the question. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So I guess there should have been a maybe in there. So it looks like even though a vast majority, almost all of the people who responded are not currently managing it, more people believe they should be. So that's something we should discuss today as well. So we're going to kick off the presentation with Scott, who will give us some insights onto justifiable business travel, I believe. So Scott, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, terrific. Thank you very much. Let's see if tell me if the PowerPoint is successfully showing. Yes, no?
Not yet.
Not yet. Second. Sure, that's an operator error on my side. That's probably going to be better.
It's showing on the small screen, but not the large screen. Is that?
So I've shared it to the Microsoft Teams room. Tell me, yeah, I can see the large screen and the small screen, and I see it's not yet displaying on the large screen.
Yeah, you can go ahead and start, Scott.
Yeah, sure. Right. So this is a terrific topic, this issue of whether or not a business trip is justified. And I want to give a lot of credit to the good folks at Festive Road for the purposeful travel concept. I think that's a wonderful inspiration for tackling this question. I think, though, once you begin to think about the purpose of travel, we have to admit that all trips have a purpose. And so really the central question is, can any of those trips be justified? That's the essence of this paradigm for understanding justifiable travel. I'm going to share 6 principles. This is the first and probably the most obvious, that travel it just essentially has to create, over the long run, it has to create more value than it costs. So that's a very obvious, but it's a fundamental principle that we have to start with, right? The next principle is really I can't underscore this enough for our good audience out there. The trip itself isn't creating any value, right? It is the meeting that happens, that the trip enables, that is actually creating the value. So that tells us that we've really got to, first and foremost, focus on the success of the meeting. The purpose, why is the person traveling, and can we maximize the probability of that meeting be successful? Trips are just an enabler of that meeting. The next principle that I think follows from the last one is a real shift in the way we think about the priorities in a managed travel program. And the point here is that meeting success, traveler well-being, and sustainability, they simply have to be placed higher, over and above the issues of cost and savings. I know that may not sit well with a lot of my good procurement friends, but that's the reality of today, that we have to acknowledge this is why people travel. These are the major concerns, and they've got to be prioritized more highly. Next principle, I'm going to skip over a few and get to principle number 7. This goes to the heart of the sustainability issue. And again, this is probably obvious. I hope we can all agree on this. If you're trying to do justifiable travel, key elements of that have to be both the supplier and the traveler being on board with the concept of making sustainable travel decisions. So again, probably obvious, but it's really worth pointing that out in today's environment. This principle here is, I think, the most important one. We're going to have smaller travel budgets going forward. That's just a fact. We will. What we now need to do is recognize that, and we need to overhaul, redesign, recast our entire approach to travel management. And so that means redesigning the travel programs and protecting the budgets in a way that reflects this reality. And if you think about what that might mean for most corporate travel programs and their policies, it gets interesting if we really believe that we have to put the concept of maximizing the success of the meeting as our first priority. It's easy to imagine that we would fundamentally want to redesign our travel policies and much of our programs around this principle. And the last principle I'll share with today, just to keep us moving on this, is a really important and I don't think a very obvious problem that we're going to face, and that's the real need for helping senior management recognize the signs of when we're not traveling enough. And to be fair, we also need to recognize the signs of when we might be traveling too much, but that problem isn't going to happen anytime soon. We really have to be concerned about having too little travel being conducted in order to achieve whatever business objectives your firm may have. So I think these are all really relevant principles in today's environment. So I'll close with that, and I will invite anyone that wants to continue a discussion around this. We are trying to develop a tool that is responsive to this principle. So Donna, thank you for that. I'm going to escape out of the PowerPoint and turn it back over to you.
You mentioned that of your principles, the most important was redesigning travel programs and budgets for higher value trips, right? That's your main takeaway of all of your principles. Can you give us a couple examples of how a travel manager can do that?
Sure. It's so much of this is a great opportunity for travel managers to initiate deeper, I think more meaningful conversations with senior management around the issue of how do we want to prioritize the goals of our travel program. And if you can get senior management to agree that, hey, yes, we want to put a priority on making our meetings, our interactions successful, and we're going to have smaller travel budgets, and we need to reserve those travel budgets for the more important trips, then it should follow that we need to elevate the way we treat our travelers. So an obvious implication is around air cabin policy. I can firmly think anyone can make a case that if we really want travelers to have really successful outcomes on their long haul trips, they should be flying in business class. We should not be cramming them into economy or even premium economy if we really care about prioritizing the meeting and making that as successful as we can be. That's one example, Don, of I think how a travel policy can and should be modified to reflect these new principles.
Interesting. So even though the budgets are going to be lower, the costs, how do you adjust that? So flying would be higher. How do you work with a lower budget with that?
Yeah, so let's take again on faith that these trips are going to be more important. The lower value trips won't be approved if you have smaller budgets. Well, those higher value trips have so much value that I think they will easily justify the higher airfare, a better quality hotel, better quality ground transportation. All of the cost of the trip pales now in comparison to the value that can be achieved. And if we really want to focus on the success of the interaction, the meeting that we're wrapping that trip around, these higher costs are, I think, well justified.
So a trip's value is different from the trip cost, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And do you have a way to calculate those?
Say that again, please.
Do you have a way to calculate each element?
Oh, is there a way to calculate each element of the trip's cost and the value? Well, the trip's cost, yes, certainly, but the trip's value, no. And it's a fool's errand. It's a long walk in the hot sun. It can't be done. It can't be done credibly anyway. So don't try. It's always going to come down to, as I think it should, management judgment. And so fine. What we do need is a more rigorous and I think a more objective approach to just weighing the obvious inputs into making that decision. So why are we traveling? How important is the meeting? Have you met with these people before? You know, how much opportunity is there to create value based on where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish? Those are pretty essentially the inputs that most managers will want to take on board before they take that decision. So keep it simple. Just focus on a few of these key elements.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate that. Let's move up a little closer now that the presentation has ended.
Do you want me over there?
You want to go in the middle?
Yeah.
Okay.
There. Great. Thank you. All right. So we're going to bring Richard and Mark in now. Thank you, guys. Richard, do you have a justifiable or purposeful travel program at your company? And can you, if so, can you share a couple of examples of how that works in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think in practice, we're still under international restrictions on travel. Actually, I've got a meeting at lunchtime today with leadership to discuss, you know, that we extended to the end of the year restrictions on international travel, but there's actually, you know, we can see there's an appetite and actually quite a lot of business case justification. But of course, you can't forget about the government regulations, the restrictions that are on the travel to start with. So I think certain things are out of our control, but the behaviours, I think, and let's bring it back. I mean, I was fortunate to be one of the industry corporate peers that met with the Festive Road guys to create the Purposeful Travel document originally back last November. And then I remember a lot of the discussions, and it was interesting to see the differential from industry to industry. You know, you might all be corporate travel program buyers or creators and owners, but we've all got a different agenda, because the first point of alignment is with your strategic positioning, with your board, your company strategy. I mean, it's well publicized, BP's transition into alternative energy away from oil and gas, but that doesn't happen today. So we've got a long program of adjustment, but digitalization and agility is high up on the agenda. But if you think about the three pillars, well, originally, you know, anybody that's worked or operated with BP would understand that we don't compromise on safety. So you've got one pillar of safety, you know, that you're aligning your program and your policy to. Our policy's foundation is built around the safety. And as Scott said, you know, we have a business travel policy of 4 hours. Even during low oil prices through the pandemic, we reviewed it. We could save millions of dollars. But, you know, health, HR, safety, security, we all looked at it and said, no, you know, we don't save those dollars just to move somebody into an economy class. You know, retention of staff, attraction of staff, etc. So that's one area. And then the other pillars, you know, around that operational area that it has risen sharply over the pandemic is the sustainability. Now, sustainability has a kind of an equal influence, but it's a fluid environment that is going to consistently change as we move forward. You know, the measurements of energy and water, commitment of reduction, etc., alignment of, are we working with the right supply base? And then, you know, one of the big influences is this isn't a commodity, this is an emotional service environment. So you've got different diversity of stakeholders, not just because of the divisional breakup of your organization, but actually the culture. So we're working with our collaborative colleagues in China, in America, in South Africa, in Australia. You know, they would all have a different perspective, and sustainability would be on the agenda and the commitment to central policy. But you know, you've got to take into that consideration that, you know, we have been working from home, we've been in a different working environment, and the appetite to interact as of today, you know, hybrid has its values. There's a perception that some of the virtual areas is cheaper to do, but on the long run it's not. I think you've got to kind of look at that balance between purposeful travel. Is it revenue generating? Is there a business case to actually, I'm just popping over the pond to have a catch up with my colleagues for a week or two and visiting a couple of offices. Could I be doing this as we're doing it now? And I think that's the litmus test as we move forward, to look into your policy, that actually the third pillar being cost. There's a lot of focus on how do we look at cost versus value. And I think that's the trick at the moment, because supply, demand, etc., the inconsistency of rates and availability, service elements of our supply base as well. So I think the cost becomes the stakeholder ownership, but actually, the virtual delivery, going back to the question that was asked to the audience, is we have a seat at the table. The ownership actually, there's multiple areas because of cyber and digital security. Our IT guys need to, be probably the first guys that analyze, is that app, is that interaction safe for our company through our cyber? Those kind of areas that we need to create. But then it comes back to informed information at the point of decision making, that our stakeholders can make that decision. Should this activity be travel? Should it be hybrid, or should it be virtual? And that's what we're creating at the moment, is that kind of process that people can make informed decisions, and bringing the sustainability into the transactional area instead of reporting of data after you've traveled or after you've held your conference. So I think, that's where we are at the moment, and, hopefully that's given you an insight.
Okay, so it's in process.
So won't be stopping.
Mark, similar question. What are you working on at Novo Nordisk about, first of all, justifiable travel, purposeful travel? Do you have an opinion on terminology?
So when people travel, we believe that the trip is already justified. If people have decided to travel, the business unit has the budget, and it's for them to decide the budget, how they use that budget. My team's role is to help that line of business manage that budget. So if the budgets are reduced, then how can we do that through different classes of travel, different ways of travel, or digital engagements? I think as we come out of COVID, we are in a bit of a limbo state, because what we're seeing is, depending on the line of business department, the business that is being done, you've got groups that are just sort of can't wait to get on a plane, get to see their colleagues. We've had a lot of people hired during the pandemic that people haven't seen. I met a colleague on Monday for the first time face to face, and they were hired sort of within 2 months of our office closing. So I think we're in limbo. I think it's yet to be determined. We saw a pickup in North America and parts of Asia, a little bit in Europe, and then the Delta variant came along, kind of slowed things down. We had some in-person meetings and events on the books. They got postponed again. I think as we get to the end of the year and into 22, that's going to be the tell. My CFO keeps asking me what's my forecast for next year. I actually have a crystal ball on my desk, but the batteries don't seem to work very well. And I downgraded it. I mean, at first I was thinking maybe around 70% of where we were in 19, although I'd like to stop benchmarking everything on 19. But I think now maybe 60%. And I think it just depends on, people take that first trip and then they say, I don't need to do this as often as I used to. And I think it goes to Scott's comment about, when are we traveling too much and too little to manage the business? At this point, we're in the middle of return to office. We're aligning return to travel with that. We've made it easier for people to travel, so it's their choice. To Richard's comment, there's still a lot of restrictions out there. Mm-hmm. I think as they ease, people become easier in their own minds about travel, and then they're going to make that decision whether they want to travel or not.
So you're saying is it more of the individual making the decision?
At the end of the day, it's the line of business, it's that leadership of each of those lines of business and departments as to when they're going to travel. I feel my team's role is there to consult with them and help them make those decisions. If you've got a project that requires perhaps 6 trips, 6 meetings, could you do the first one in person, the last one in person, and the others become interactive. The other challenge is getting people around the table. There's one thing, I mean, Scott's up at 5 o'clock in the morning to take this. And is there an advantage to bring people in from all different time zones to a meeting for 3 or 4 days somewhere where everyone's now sitting around a table? Or do we have the situations that I'm sure we've all been in at some point where you're up at 10 o'clock at night or 4 o'clock in the morning to be able to be on a video call with a global team? And certainly coming from the US, where we have 3 time zones, when we've done meetings that include our teams in Hawaii as well as the East Coast, someone's going to be up early and someone's going to be up late. So it's balancing that well-being piece as well to the cost, and then of course the big question around sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Right, sustainability always top of mind these days.
Yep.
Sure. Are you more engaged with different stakeholders in your company now than pre-COVID when it comes to managing the travel program, and which ones and how are they impacting the decision on whether or not to travel?
Stakeholders, no, they're fairly the same. I mean, certainly finance is a big piece, because as we build budgets for next year, trying to figure out what's the number we put in for T&E. There are certain departments, lines of business that are going to travel more, like sales, marketing, compared to maybe legal or even the finance department that I report up to. And I think each one is going to be slightly different based on what they've got to deliver over time. We had a very successful year in the last year, and we're having a very successful year this year, and we've done most of it digitally. And we're working on hybrid solutions. We did a meeting recently, a regional meeting that typically we would have brought everyone together in 22 different locations. It was part broadcast, part local meetings. The agenda was the same everywhere, and we're getting better at doing that. So as we get better at doing that, we solved the problem of flying 600 people across the country and hotels and everything. Everyone was able to drive locally. So now we've got a cost savings, we've got a sustainability savings. Yes, it does create some technical challenges, but as the technology has got better in the last 18 months, probably we've taken a 5-year leap in 18 months with technology. These things that we're learning from it, and we're getting better at it.
Richard, stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, stakeholders, I think there's the obvious given. We've been through two or three restructurings. I'm now part of group finance, group procurement, whereas, before I was over in GBS, Business Solutions. And I think, the team as we've evolved since that restructure is very much focused on this digitalization area aligning. But I think me personally, you've still got your strong dotted line to your group security and your health and safety and, finance, obviously. But I think, last March we had to stand up very quickly safe passage programs with our local teams in Gulf of Mexico, in Oman, in Azerbaijan, in North Sea, and so on, to get home to rig or home to ship. So how do we continue to, operate as an energy oil company and get people safely through, isolation, through testing, straight onto the rig safely? So that gave me kind of exposure as travel team brand to more across the company. I think the restructure, we lost 2 lines of management above us. I've only got 2 or 3 lines to the board now, which is, good and bad because of the quick demand. Suddenly on a Friday, we need some figures or we need to know something. We've been protected from that in the past. I think, from a kind of a stakeholder area, I think the opportunity now is you've got to see travel not as an entity or an operation or a service delivery in isolation within the organization. it's got a huge synergy with everything that we do. Our comms team in delivering our brand, our shareholder engagement. Are we delivering our commitment to them, not just on cost, but the sustainability? Are we delivering alignment to our return to office and our future agile Hub, Club and Roam program, where we're making people, again, independently, individually responsible for making their own decisions of where they operate efficiently and safely. It's as a travel brand, we have a transient travel brand called My Trip, and then on the intranet and all the information, and Travel Safe is including the group security areas, and then we have My Event, which is our meetings and events program. So again, there's always overlapping, so working with our probably similar stakeholders who today need business travel, tomorrow need 20, 30 people as a group to move around, and then our AGM, our sponsorship areas in Formula One or the Olympics, etc. So we've got a diverse amount of stakeholders. But over the last year, I would say, we've definitely had more exposure and therefore more engagement and more seat at the table. Mm-hmm. So I think it's, coming out of the COVID, you've got to part the COVID, got to look at the future as an opportunity. And that opportunity is some lessons learned, but actually moving on with that purposeful travel with effectiveness, with senior leadership sponsorship. We've created an environment very much interactive, social media area. Our board are quite active on, outside of the company on LinkedIn and other social media areas, as well as internally on Yammer and everything. And, we're in an area where everybody's under restriction, but suddenly our leadership go off and have a visit and meet a government somewhere or something, or, and they're posting about it and saying, this is fantastic, we're moving around the world. And you've got people who are saying, well, I want to go and meet my customers, but we can't, so there's a balance of how we give that message back and say, hey, let's just calm down that, travel message. But I think, as a role, I'm not just operating as a category travel manager in every area. I've been creating a lot of what we call business development areas by analysing and segmenting my supply base and looking at those strategic partners in circular economy. So, to date this year, we've introduced 175 hotels in the UK to BP Pulse, who now have electric vehicle charging in their car parks. We announced our partnership with British Airways on the sustainable air fuel a few weeks ago, where Sean and myself and a few of us were in Vanguard House to do that. And I think, that then demonstrates where, like COP26 coming out, all the air fuel BP, so I think it's about which partners can we become the customer to, as well as the client, and it creates that kind of glue and that strength, that strategic partnerships. And that's what we're looking at all the time around the world.
Yeah, that's great. That actually leads directly into my next question,
oh, okay.
which is perfect, which is, does choosing the right suppliers to have in your programs come into play?
It does, and I'll give an example there of the partnership area, whether it's loyalty schemes, our retail forecourts, Qantas in Australia, again, loyalty scheme partnerships. Mm-hmm. I think the one thing, kind of the cautiousness around how, we've got the obvious analysis and RFI, RFP program, and I don't think there's a strong future for an annual RFP with supply base. I think we're moving into that digital dynamic environment much more with the access of multiple channels. But I think where we've got to be careful is this push on sustainability, because there's going to be a lot of requirement for suppliers to provide information around their sustainability. How are they going to support us in our delivery? So it's a collaboration in sustainability, because the industry, but I mean sustainability is in an immature position. I think there's going to be a lot of movement, but we've got to be careful that doesn't fall into a sales and marketing environment, that it becomes, that's all the information you get, but actually when you peel the onion and audit it, it doesn't stand up. It's just a tick box of yes and no's, because if the commitment is minus 5% water this year, I don't need to, be in a position where I've got to wait another year to see, well, how did you do? It's how do we work together, and what is our impact on delivering that minus 5% commitment? How can we help you as a supplier? But how do we let that information know to our travellers to say, when you stay in that hotel, think about X, Y, and Z, and you can help this partner achieve their water, etc. How do we keep an eye on the labour position, and etc. So there's lots of areas that will need to be measurable and quantifiable in sustainability. But we've got to create a collaboration with the industry to create a standardization that is measurable. We can't come in as BP and say, these are our questions, now answer them, because that customization will kill us and then kill the industry as well. So we've got to work with the peer group, the GBTA, create an environment that is measurable, is easy, and for the supply base to be able to provide their information, and it's measurable. So how do we look at supplier A versus supplier B, and what is the weighting behind that, alongside their other services and costs, etc.
So right, so you have, first you're determining whether or not to travel. Sustainability comes into play in that, and then if you do decide to travel, then which suppliers do you go to, and how, so you've identified them ahead of time to help the traveler make the best decision for that sustainability element.
Yeah, as Mark said, we don't own the budget.
Right.
So
So
we
it's
want
up
to
to-
create a safe, impactful process for them to make an informed decision on.
Yeah.
But make sure that obviously those that are not using their budget effectively are going out of the parameters of, I don't like the word compliance as such, but there is a compliance escalation area there. If somebody really does go and book themselves into a hotel suite and travel first class, then it's going to stick out like a sore thumb in the data. Yeah.
I'd like to bring in just a couple more polls real quick before we open up to general Q&A and bring Scott back. Sorry, Scott, thank you for holding off there for a few minutes. We should have question number 3 coming up on your apps. Has your company created a policy for when meeting must be virtual versus in person? And we'll give that a minute for people to respond. Okay, not quite as many respondents as the first 2.
He created a policy for when a meeting must be virtual versus in person. There were 24 votes, 54% said no, 42% said not yet, but we are considering it, and 4% yes.
Okay, sorry, my phone is... Okay, so it is being considered by nearly no for a little more than half, but it is being considered. Great. And then we have a follow-up question, final poll question. What are the factors considered for determining whether a meeting should be virtual or in person? And you can select all that apply. The type of meeting, internal versus client, the sustainability footprint, which we've noted is an important factor, cost, or other. All right, so 37% says it's dependent upon the type of meeting, internal versus client. 26% sustainability footprint, 22% cost, and 13% other. So in line with what we've been discussing. So great, thank you for participating in that. So we talked a little bit about policy. What do you think about the results? What do you think about having?
It doesn't surprise me. Sorry to go first. It doesn't surprise me at all, because I think people are still getting into the balance of getting actually back to a different working environment. I think there's one other influence that we'll capture is for us as a large organisation. We went into diversification of our assets a few years ago, where we looked at our real estate and started to sell those off. So in Sunbury, we've got space for 6,000 employees, and we sold the asset and took a 20-year lease. And we've just done that in St James at our head office, but not for as long a period. So we're measuring, because of our structure and the way that we collaborate with our real estate and our facilities, etc. Again, this comes back as travel is part of the whole environment of digital and talent in BP. And I think what we're looking at is saying, well, how are we going to use this space in future? So we've always had a program within the My Event is anybody contacted our venue sourcing agencies or went online to use Meetings Booker to use, Booker, the first question is, have you looked at internal space? So I think, that area of how are we going to utilize space of 6,000 desks in Sunbury, we're clearly not going to have 6,000 people going into the office every day now. So, are we going to use a break clause and remove that particular building, or actually utilize that building for something different, utilize it as collaboration space, as meeting space, event space, rather than using external venues? I mean, those are the kind of questions that I think large organizations will be looking at, saying what footprint and what asset space do we need in future? Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to influence then that use of virtual to hybrid to actually travel. And I think that could change some of the dynamics in our footprint in future.
Right. And Mark, what do you think about the results from the polls?
I think when it comes to policy, we are going to look at our policy as we get into, well, now we are in fourth quarter, but certainly as we get into fourth quarter and first quarter next year, start to look at the policy. We did recently change our approval process, specifically in North America, where we've actually in the past had a tighter approval process than in other areas of the world, and we actually eliminated a lot of the restrictions within
Mm-hmm.
approval. So we used to have a require approval for all international trips. We've taken that away. We're now looking at using the approval process more around sustainability. So for short international trips, short domestic trips, getting more value out of a trip. So instead of just going, if you can, go to Europe for 1 or 2 days, go for 3 or 5 days, and take care of more things in one trip than doing multiple trips. So sustainability is kind of our number one at the moment. We want to get people comfortable. For those that want to, we want to get people comfortable traveling again. So we wanted to make the current environment, as we return to offices and return to travel, we wanted to make the current environment comfortable and as easy as possible
Mm-hmm.
for the traveler. Down the road, I think again it's that wait and see to see what are the needs. Scott mentioned about different classes of cabin.
Mm-hmm.
We changed our policy a few years ago to a predominantly premium economy policy. It simplified the policy. It means that no one has to fly coach except for what I call a domestic flight. Certainly in the US, I think of Europe as domestic, right, from European country to European country. International, we allow premium economy. There's an exception process for business, and some of our higher ups can go business class. Could business class be on the table in the future as we maybe spend a little more on less travel, but we're still below what we used to spend? that's up for discussion. That's the analysis I have to do and present as a business case internally to say, this would add value to our organization if we did this. So we reduce the budgets, but we take a little of that and give back. And that's the philosophy we used when we moved to premium economy. And today's premium economy products are actually pretty good. Most international airlines now have one. So there'll definitely be some changes. I think when you asked earlier about stakeholders, I think it's getting stakeholder feedback as well. What are they expecting? What do they want for their departments and their people? And how will the road warriors of past change in the way they do business? How will new travelers come along and see how they they want to have interactions? And rather than, I agree, it's about the meeting, not about the trip, and about that face-to-face interaction. Does that face-to-face interaction create a different outcome than having that digital outcome? We know that we're a culture of, we want to get together, right? And we know that when we get into a room together, sometimes it can have a different outcome and a quicker outcome than when you're in digital. So I think these are all factors that we've got to take into account as we re-evolve over the next 6, 12, 18 months.
Scott, is there anything you want to share or add based on their comments and the polling questions we just had?
Absolutely. I'll take the polling result. I think it was 47% said that they have a policy favoring client travel, perhaps as the deciding factor for permitting travel.
They're considering it. 44% are
right.
considering it. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Let me just be as clear as I can. That is an incredibly foolish premise to believe that only client travel should be justified over internal travel. Perhaps it's not, perhaps people aren't considering it quite in those stark terms, but if you believe that client travel is far more valuable than internal travel, then your organization should absolutely sell off all its office spaces, right? And the only reason we have office spaces is because we believe there's great value in having people work close together. So it's like saying, well, we can't justify a trip that's designed to create innovation or foster leadership or teamwork or trust and accountability. It's on the face, it's beyond silly. I really hope the industry, our travel managers can do a better job of advocating for travel for internal purposes, because it clearly has value, and oftentimes will outweigh the trivial trip to make a call on an account that has very little revenue opportunity. So, sorry, I just had to riff on that because it's been on top of my mind for a while. Thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize, I went to the wrong poll. It was 37% that had said the type of meeting, whether internal versus client, would be. So that's still more than 1 in 3, so nearly 1 in 4.
It's the top choice, and it just needs to be dispelled. It's a really silly way to look at justifying travel.
Great. You mentioned this, I want to touch on it a little bit more. How does return to office affect the decision to travel or not?
Yeah, so, I mean, think about why we get together. It's because we need that, we believe that there's some spark, there's some voltage, there's some magic that's going to happen by being in the same room together that we can't obtain through this virtual channel. So whether it's meeting locally and we're driving into the office or to a retreat or to something like that, or if we're flying in, all of those are subsets of the need to meet in person. So first we just have to ask ourselves, when does it make sense to get better results when we're in person versus virtual? And then those people that need to travel, that should fall out of that. The return to office problem is just the same problem we're having in terms of justifying travel. It's just writ large. It's just a much larger scale of problem because there's so many more opportunities to meet in person. And that's the dilemma. Does remote work or not? And if not, when does it not work? And then travel is just, a small enabler of creating those in-person meetings that truly are justified.
I think we could actually see more in-person meetings in as much as companies who maybe did not have as big a remote workforce as in the past, those remote teams will now want to come together, as Richard said, using their offices more as collaboration space. If you've got now teams who were dispersed across a building, and now maybe half of them are in the building and half of them working from home, those teams are going to need to get together. I remember in a past life, I led a completely virtual team, and we would get together at least once a quarter for 3 or 4 days. And that, as Scott said, it sparked that collaboration, that innovation. You have to get together. So I think we're going to see travel patterns change a little bit. And I agree when you talked about internal versus external. There's a huge value on internal interaction as well as external. Can you mix the two and have them at the same time, so you get maybe 2 trips instead of 3, and that helps to all the other things like sustainability and cost.
Mm-hmm.
But I think again it's this whole evolution of what will travel look like over the next 18 months.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said there. I think I've experienced for 10 years in BP working in a global team, so I think the dilemma or the objective is inclusion, because you've got cultural differences. So we had colleagues who were getting on the phone late at night in China and Malaysia, and the US are just getting up, having their breakfast, and we're at lunchtime. It's pretty obvious from the dynamics of that group is that the quietest ones in the rooms are going to be the guys in China and Malaysia because of the way that they operate. But how do you bring them in? So if you're in a face-to-face environment with diverse cultures, as a facilitator, it's probably a lot easier in this environment than it is virtually to get them feeling that they're part of that group or overcome their apprehension to speak up. So I think that's one of the areas that has got to be part of this. How do you create an environment for collaboration, both virtually and in the office? But there's then, I've worked, probably come down to the office once or twice a week in the past, but I only went to the office for the first time 3-4 weeks ago since last March. And, I arrived, I got a 4-hour commute from where I live in Suffolk down to Heathrow area, and fight that M25 car park and everything, and I've still got the same journey to go home. And I think, okay, well, hopefully this today, and I sat there with my headset on looking at a computer the whole day because of my diary. I'm looking for leadership to create an environment where we're not got back-to-back meetings and appointments. At the moment, we need to open that office environment that we can start. As a travel manager, I need my supply base to be able to come into that office so I can interact with them face to face again. Otherwise, I've got to travel somewhere to go and meet them in London, or I can't fly at the moment. So, yeah. So it's been, it's difficult. But how do we get back out of that? But create an area where it does allow that interaction, but you feel that you've been productive. Because I'm certainly not driving up and down the motorway just to go and sit behind a computer with a headset in future. It's just a waste of company time and my time.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to bring it back a little bit to whether to travel or not. And is it possible to quantify the relative productivity, financial, sustainability, and other merits of travel versus non-travel interactions? And Scott, I know you had some comments on that.
Sure. We can clearly quantify the cost. We can estimate with a reasonable degree of confidence the sustainability, the emissions associated with the trip. I think we're getting better at that. Can we quantify the productivity or the value created? Zero chance of being able to do that in a credible and scalable way. I think it's everyone thinks that it would be nice to know, and wouldn't, if you knew that number, then you could make a easier decision on the justification of a trip. It's just a remarkably wasteful effort. We should just rely on management judgment and just be done with it.
Do any of you know of any tools that are being created to help calculate?
Yeah.
Well, sure. We're developing a tool specifically for this purpose of deciding whether or not a trip is justified. I'm sure there are others that are out there. I think it's a new category of tool. and I think they'll evolve and become better, but they'll simply be decision aids, right? I don't think they're going to be intended to make the decision of justifying a trip. They're simply, I think their mission should be to help folks understand the merits of traveling versus not traveling.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think, you know, the kind of the environment that we're facing is we have got to push that responsibility and accountability back to the business to make those decisions. But we've got to provide an environment where people want to adopt the program, want to use the program, because it's effective not only in keeping people safe, but it manages the cost. You know, we're building a new approval tool internally at the moment around that, and we've had some quite interesting, deep discussions, I'd say, with leadership as well, because I sit in group finance. So of course my CFO coming down is looking at how do we control the approval tool on the cost. And I'm saying, put the cost to one side, build the program, build the engagement and the environment for people to make those decisions at the transaction. But obviously the approval goes back to the merits of should I travel or not. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the litmus test as you as an individual. Do you feel that you could stand up in front of your leadership and your peers and saying this business trip is justifiable? If you feel it is, put it in the approval tool. Your line management or your vice president, whoever it is, will approve it. You know, and if they don't, they've got to give a reason why. But then that comes back into then I've made my booking and marrying that transactional data to my T&E spend data. I got the approval, I spent the money, did I actually do the right thing at the point of, you know, it's too late, I've gone and spent the money and I upgraded myself and I was out of policy. That's a behaviour issue, and we've got to look at why. But, you know, internally, as I go back to about one of the biggest threats around safety is cyber. So internally, we have a monthly cyber barometer environment, which we're looking at the approval tool in a similar area. It's engaging, it's a gamification area. So you've got a barometer of saying, did I click on that test phishing email? Have I used my business email externally on social media by mistake? You know, lots of little things that get picked up. And you have a score. And you have a score as an individual, you have a score as a team and a division and so on. And you can imagine how the competitiveness, but the engagement, because I'm being informed of each month, how am I doing? So what better than to have an approval tool, creates an environment that then reports back to you as an individual and your team to say, this is your score of your managing policy within your travel, managing your cost within your budget approval, but also your sustainability footprint, the 3 pillars again. So that's, you know, that's where we're going. We're not there today. It's going to take some time to build, but phasing, we'll get there in the end.
I apologize. We do have a couple questions from the audience.
Excellent.
I'm sorry, I missed those. Decisions must be made as a team. Why pass responsibility to employees?
I don't think it's passing decision to the employees. I think, again, it's our job to consult with those lines of business. It's got to be their decision whether they're going to travel or not. There's only so much hand-holding you can do. If they've got a budget, it's even when I go to my VP and say, I'd like to travel to do this, to this conference, or to see this person, or whatever. And the comment typically comes back is, you've got a budget, manage that budget. And I think it's that relationship you have, obviously, with your leader. But I think it's not necessarily our job to handhold every employee on when they can travel and how they can travel. Sure, we can help them travel economically and get the best out of their budget, but at the end of the day, it's the business budget. Then they have to make that decision, how to use that.
Right. And then many employees travel for the pleasure of traveling, not professionally. That's what managers should monitor to save unnecessary resources and expenses. That's a comment. And current and future travel restrictions currently impose more onerous isolation requirements on those not fully vaccinated. I would be interested in hearing the panel's views on whether staff vaccination status should impact on whether or not they should be authorized to travel or not.
Go ahead.
After you're North America, so I'm
okay. I mean, I can speak for us in North America. We instituted a vaccine policy for our office and testing. We haven't necessarily instituted anything for travel, but I think travel is creating their own. If you I mean, I see a point, a time when if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to be able to travel. I believe CDC today is even saying if you're not vaccinated, we recommend you don't travel. So I think that's going to evolve over time just based on restrictions, what airlines want to carry, the people they want to carry, and countries what they want to allow in. I think that's going to go with any vaccine restriction a country has. If I think back in history, think about the whole yellow fever for Africa, right? So countries that require it, you got to have the certificate and you can't go without it. So I think vaccinations are going to be top of mind, period, when it comes to travel.
Yeah. Okay, it comes down to, I mean, it's not as an individual organisation. Yeah, we've got our policies about going into office, and if you're not vaccinated, then you need to take a test every few days if you're going into the office. I arrived this morning and I was asked to prove my vaccine. Yeah, so if I hadn't have been vaccinated, I would have had to show a test. So, you know, that's Excel or the business travel's decision. So I respect it, and I know that before I came. So I think, you know, that's across the board, isn't it? It's going to be different until there is will we get to a global standard? We don't know.
Right. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank you all for participating. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for attending. And please fill out the survey that will show up in your app in a few minutes. You should be getting a notification for that soon. Thank you.
Okay.